All right, guys, if you're back here, it is because we're making our way through the Cold War. And today we're going to really help you understanding what is happening in Asia with the American policy of containment. So let's get it going here. I mean, the first big issue as we get through it here is what are we going to do with, China? We know that the Soviet Union is already a communist country, so we're going to deal with this communist victory in China. And this area kind of turned red overnight in 1949. So let's get it going here, right? During World War II, the United States was allied with China and an enemy of Japan. And what happened after World War II is that they kind of switched. So Japan became a democracy. We helped Japan rebuild, and we became kind of an ally or a friend towards that nation. And China was leaning towards communism. And once again, the American policy was to have communism contained. So in 1949, it really will shift. But I'll take you through what happened in China. In the 1930s, China was involved in a civil war. Well, in any civil war, there's going to be two sides. And Mao Zedong was the communist leader who was trying to control that nation, and Chiang Kai-shek was the nationalist leader. Well, we obviously are going to throw our support behind Chiang Kai-shek and support those nationalists in their kind of victory over those communists, because we felt beneficial to us. Well, what happened? The communists win. Mao Zedong defeats the nationalists, and China becomes a communist country. It was renamed in 1949 the People's Republic of China. Well, what happens to Chiang Kai-shek and his forces? They have to flee. So they actually leave China and they move to Taiwan. So for a good 30 years, we are not going to actually view the Chinese as even being there. We don't trade with them because they turn to communism. So there's the guy that we backed, we Americans backed, Chiang Kai-shek, and of course there's Chairman Mao with his little red book. So we were worried about communism, and it might spread actually beyond China. So our policy of containment is going to really take shape in those Asian nations, especially Korea and Vietnam. So America began keeping a real close eye on Asia and continued our policy of containment. So if you were to analyze and look at that policy, was containment successful in China? And the answer is no, because China became a communist country. But it may be successful in other places. So beginning in 1949, containment seemed to fail in certain parts. So communism was spreading in China. We were fearful that Korea would also spread and become more communist, and Vietnam as well. So we're going to examine what happened in Korea, which is right here. And if you notice that Korea is kind of divided, there's a northern part of Korea that's already red, and there's a southern part of Korea that is not. And we'll deal with Vietnam later on. So the Korean War, what happened? Well, after World War II, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel, or line of latitude. North Korea was a communist nation influenced by the Soviet Union, a friend to the Soviet Union, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea establishes this communist government. Well, South Korea was controlled by the United States. Remember, Japan had controlled that during the war. We established what's known as the Republic of Korea, an anti-communist democratic government, and the leader down south was Syngman Rhee. So we have kind of our section of Korea, and the Soviet Union has their section of Korea. So, there's your 38th parallel. Northern Korea is being influenced by China and the Soviet Union, those communist countries. And Southern Korea is, of course, a non-communist country, and that is being influenced by us, by the Americans. So fighting begins in 1950. Well, what happens? North Korea actually invades South Korea in 1950. They're looking to spread communism. They want a unified 100% communist nation, and our policy is to contain communism. So the issue seems pretty basic here. If North Korea is willing to use their military to expand communism, well, our country and Harry S. Truman, who was the president at that time, decided to send United States troops to contain communism. The Soviet Union wants to spread it. We want to contain it. So when you look at the total 3 years of the war, I can kind of take you through it here for you, right? So here's what happened in 1950, right? The North Koreans invaded, and they pretty much took over the entire this peninsula here, all the way, and they're trying to get that city of Busan. So what we did was we landed at Seoul, we landed at Busan, we landed troops, and we began to push the North Koreans back. We actually pushed them beyond the 38th parallel, all the way up to this Yalu River. And that is when the Chinese forces decided to help out the North Koreans. And they began pushing us all the way back to around the line that kind of was established at the beginning. So today, by 1953, there was an armistice. So there was a ceasefire. So really, the Korean War, technically, by semantics, is still going on. There's not a treaty that's signed. It's simply saying, hey, we're done fighting, and so are you. So let's just kind of keep this border the same as it was at the beginning of the war, as it is at the end of the war. So we take you through who was the leader I gotta move that thing. Who was the leader in terms of our military forces, and that was General Douglas MacArthur. He commanded the troops in Korea, and we went in there with the United Nations and a bunch of other forces, so we weren't in there by ourselves. We went in there, I'll read this for you. United Nations members send troops to join the American forces. Well, what happens late in the war? China sent troops to help the North Koreans. By 1951, there was a complete stalemate. Neither side was able to gain a clear advantage. So, what happens? We're kind of going to end this war between the two. And there is Harry Truman and Douglas MacArthur. So, when we look at MacArthur in command towards the end, there was a definite conflict between what our president wanted to do and our military general wanted to do. And MacArthur's going to end up getting fired, right? Truman's going to recall him from the mission and dismiss him from his command. So there's kind of a battle between what the military wants and what the president wants. So, what happens? Well, after 3 years, the hostilities end. We begin truce talks. Dwight D. Eisenhower becomes president and claims that he is going to end that war. In the ceasefire, once again, a truce. It's not an actual kind of treaty. We signed that in 1953, right? So Eisenhower ends the war. So what happened? The war lasted 3 years, costed $15 million, 34,000 Americans died, over 1 million Koreans and Chinese died. And then today, when we look at that divided line, it is the same. So Korea remained a divided nation. Today, there is still a North and South Korea. North Korea today still is a communist country, and South Korea is not. So when we look at containment in Asia, containment was unsuccessful in China. Containment seems to be successful in Korea because we obtained our objective of keeping communism where it was and not letting it grow. So some new directions. Containment began to take a different course after the Korean War. Why? We're not just talking about it. We're not just spending money. We are now sending our military, right? So early efforts focused more on an economic and spending more money because we certainly didn't want to send that military. But we would use military if it was necessary. We were committed to doing that. And Korea was a huge warning to future confrontations between democratic and communists, saying that, hey, it's not just going to be, we're not just going to talk about containing it. We're not just going to spend money to contain it. We are going to commit troops if necessary. So there's kind of two stories there for you in this video on what is happening with the Cold War, what is happening with containment in Asia. So I hope this helps you answer that question at the end, and we'll keep this Cold War rolling, and we'll see how it turns out.